Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Forum Daily West. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. The country's premiers head to Ottawa to meet with Prime Minister Mark Carney for the first time since his swearing in. Plus, more details on the crash landing at Toronto Pearson Airport last month. An aviation expert says a descent warning was triggered on the Delta plane seconds before it crashed. And as violence and vandalism ramp up against Tesla owners, we speak with a local Cybertruck owner who's been targeted. Thanks so much for joining us. Prime Minister Mark Carney met with premiers today at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa for the first time since being sworn in last Friday. The meeting comes days before Carney is expected to launch a federal election campaign. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says the focus of today's meeting is interprovincial trade, while Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says his priority is to discuss China's tariffs on Canadian canola oil and meal. But the main focus of today's meeting is expected to be the effects of all U.S. and Chinese tariffs. During a visit to Edmonton Thursday, Carney held a press conference to announce more money is on the way for fire-ravaged Jasper, Alberta, as the federal government announced $187 million in new funding for the town's rebuild. Carney also told reporters he's committed to making Canada's oil and gas sector more competitive and stated that his meeting with the premiers in Ottawa Friday would be about, quote, getting things done.
Yes, pipelines built across this country so that we can displace imports of foreign oil. It's about building out the energy infrastructure more broadly. It's about building energy corridors and trade corridors, including potentially up from here through to Nunavut. So we have additional deep water ports and opportunities there. And the commitment is to deliver those projects like those that we agree that are national priorities.
Well, in Edmonton Thursday, Carney also met with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, where she laid out a list of demands of the next Prime Minister. Included in the list was the elimination of the oil and gas emissions cap. Today, during a press conference, Premier Smith said that Carney and his new environmental minister, Terry Duguid, were apparently at odds with each other on how to impose a production cap on Alberta.
Yesterday, in my discussions with the Prime Minister, I made it clear that Alberta will no longer tolerate an emissions cap on oil and gas, which absolutely works like a production cap that scares away billions of investment and thousands of jobs, makes us more dependent on the United States, and has been found by Ottawa's own Parliamentary Budget Office to be greatly destructive to the Canadian economy. He both told me in the meeting and then later in his press conference with the media that same day that he wasn't in favor of hard caps like that. He said he was interested in results and getting projects like pipelines in the ground. And that's good because you can't fill new pipelines and cap oil production at the same time. So the Prime Minister's words sounded kind of nice yesterday until I looked at my phone right after the meeting with him and found out that his new Environment Minister had just told media on the other side of the country that the federal Liberals would be keeping the emissions cap in place. And this has been the same story for the last 10 years.
According to a report released by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, if Ottawa's imposed emissions cap on Alberta's oil and gas remains in place under a Carney-led government, it will cost the Canadian economy more than $20 billion and slash more than 40,000 Canadian jobs. Chris Sims, Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, says this is not a Team Canada approach.
We're hearing all sorts of comments coming from especially, the Eastern power brokers saying, hey, we're all in this together. We have to be Team Canada. We need to be independent. We need to find more markets for our product. Well, how is it you think that keeping a cap on Alberta's oil and gas sector is going to do that? This is right in line with Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, which is, of course, strangling our network of pipelines.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is announcing a plan to boost training and jobs for workers in the skilled trades. Poilievre says if elected, his plan for, quote, more boots, less suits will provide faster employment insurance for apprentices in licensed trades and offer apprenticeship grants. The plan will also fund training halls for skills development for up to 350,000 workers over 5 years and work with provinces to harmonize health and safety regulations so workers can work anywhere in Canada.
We're going to pay for all this by cutting bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, and waste. Like I said, more boots, less suits. After 10 years of the Trudeau-Carney Liberals, Canada's economy is weaker and more reliant than ever. Especially, and we've lost $500 billion because of the high taxes here. Mr. Carney supported carbon taxes on Canada while he invested in American coal.
As reported on BCN Thursday, phase 1 of a report by the Transportation Safety Board of Canada was released into the crash landing of a Delta Airlines flight at Toronto Pearson Airport on February 17th. Aviation expert Kit Darby says that preliminary report suggests the aircraft came down at a high speed and touched down hard enough to break its landing gear.
Well, first of all, it was relatively normal until the last few hundred feet. So the airplane was operating at a speed and at rates of descent that were normal, and it was the landing itself where we got in trouble. So the normal rates of descent would be probably 100 or 200 feet a minute. That would produce a relatively smooth touchdown. 300, 400 feet a minute, that would be a firm landing. The definition of a hard landing is 600 feet a minute. And that would be very firm, very noticeable to the crew and the passengers. And in this case, we touched down at over 1,000 feet a minute, 1,100 feet a minute. That is a really hard landing. So it would appear that hard landing was hard enough to break the airplane. The reason that it was so survivable is that we had a long, smooth runway in front of us. It's the sudden stop that gets you in trouble. And in this case, other than the landing itself, which was very firm, the airplane was not stopped from sliding to a stop, a relatively lengthy deceleration, not causing any threat to the passengers or the crew. So it was windy, very windy. It was about 23, 25 knots, and it appeared right at the end that they got a gust for an additional amount. The pilots closed the power because the gust caused them to be a little fast. One of the techniques in proper landing is that you start the nose up first to break the descent and then reduce the power. In this case, it looks like the power was reduced already in a pretty significant descent and reduced the power before bringing the nose up. And as an instructor, that would pretty much guarantee a firm landing. And in this case, they were beyond firm into a hard landing.
And speaking of air travel, traffic is set to resume at London's Heathrow Airport following a full day of suspended flights, which is expected to affect air traffic for days to come. This after a fire at an electrical substation knocked out power to Europe's busiest flight hub, disrupting hundreds of thousands of passengers, including at least one passenger from Lethbridge. BCN's Landon Hickok has more on that story.
Around 120 flights and 30,000 passengers were redirected when they learned that power was cut to Heathrow International, Europe's busiest airport. Reportedly, residents in West London heard an explosion coming from an electrical substation near the airport, followed by large blazes of fire. Counter-terror police say they are treating the fire as non-suspicious. The Associated Press interviewed travel expert Simon Calder, who said getting back to regular service will still take time.
I'm afraid even if, and let's hope to the high heavens that we actually get flights back on course today, and that it does reopen at midnight as they're hoping to, even then, with planes, pilots, passengers strewn right across Europe and stuck in various places in North America, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, it is going to be a nightmare trying to get the schedules back on.
More than 1,300 departures and arrivals to Heathrow were affected, with the impact being felt from local residents. One owner of a local travel agency here in Lethbridge is on a business trip in Budapest, Hungary right now. She spent some time talking with BCN about the Heathrow disruption and what she and her clients are hearing regarding the situation.
Heathrow obviously is one of the busiest airports in the world. So when something happens at an airport like that, it has effects everywhere. And in Canada, we have it. It obviously is a major hub to get to Europe and, of course, just the UK. People are traveling through all sorts of different routes for business or for pleasure. When I'm coming home on Monday, we're going from Vienna through London, and that's just the way things are. It's such a major hub.
As the airport begins to reopen, the work continues to get the 200,000 passengers back on their itineraries.
I am here with a group of travel advisors, and so we've got multiple clients who obviously, might be affected. All that we're hearing here is that the airport will be open as soon as it can be.
Two Tesla vehicle fires in Calgary are being investigated as arson, and police believe they're connected. Investigators say a Tesla car was reported on fire at a downtown charging station on Tuesday, while a Cybertruck was found ablaze at a south side storage lot the next day. The fires come soon after a Tesla was stolen and driven into a river in Calgary. Meanwhile, in Ontario, police say as many as 80 Tesla vehicles at a dealership in Hamilton were found on Wednesday with scratches, punctured tires, and other damage. In Lethbridge, BCN spoke with a local Tesla owner who says they've had paint thrown on their driveway, had their truck scratched, and have been called Nazis. This Cybertruck driver who wishes to remain anonymous says, quote, "It's heartbreaking to see how people are treating each other, and it's terrifying for many of the Tesla owners. I get flipped off daily. Old ladies, young women, middle-aged men." Now, a different Cybertruck in Lethbridge was spray painted just this week. There you can see in the picture there. It's interesting also to note that in the U.S., President Donald Trump has declared these acts of vandalism as acts of domestic terrorism, with convicted parties facing up to 20 years in prison. And speaking of Tesla, U.S. regulators have just issued a recall for nearly all Cybertrucks sold. It's the 8th recall of the Tesla vehicles since deliveries began just over a year ago. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says the recall covers more than 46,000 Cybertrucks. The warning notes an exterior panel running along the left and right side of the windshield can detach while driving. The remedy uses an adhesive that isn't vulnerable to environmental embrittlement alongside additional reinforcements. In other news, on Thursday, shortly after 4 p.m., authorities closed 43rd Street between Highway 3 and 1st Avenue South just after a major collision. Police have not yet provided an update, but our BCN cameras captured the aftermath of what appeared to be a gray van that collided with a black pickup truck and flipped it on its side. Crews rushed to rescue an occupant of the truck using pliers or the jaws of life to cut open the roof before extracting the driver and taking them away on a stretcher. It's unclear how many individuals were involved or the current conditions of either occupant of the two vehicles involved. Crews cleared the scene within a couple of hours and reopened the street to traffic shortly after. Well, did you know that Lethbridge had the first school in Canada focused on Indigenous economic development, governance, and business management? Well, we're talking about the University of Lethbridge's Dillon School of Business, which is also celebrating its 40th anniversary. Dawn McIntyre, Dillon School of Business co-chair, explains why it's important to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into business education.
Any type of business you want to do in Canada or in the world today, you have to have a basic understanding of Indigenous peoples and the Indigenous rights and responsibilities they feel to the territories. What we're doing is we're making sure that we are heard and seen in boardrooms. We are not neglected, relegated, or forgotten, because business now cannot be done without a recognition and understanding of an Indigenous presence. So every Dillon student takes an Indigenous course.
Hudson's Bay says it has found a way to keep 6 stores open. Canada's oldest company has been seeking permission to liquidate all of its stores as part of its creditor protection case. In court this morning, the lawyer for Hudson's Bay says the company is making the request to keep 6 open because recent sales have exceeded the company's expectations. The company wants the ability to pull additional stores out of the liquidation should it find a way forward for even more locations. But its lawyer warns if a restructuring solution is not found quickly, the 6 stores will be added to the liquidation sale. Pension plans, severance, and job losses are among the many worries Hudson's Bay employees face as they anxiously await a decision by the courts on whether it can proceed with a proposed liquidation plan.
Hudson's Bay has spent the week in court asking for permission to liquidate all of its stores. If it does get that permission, it's pretty well understood that about 9,300 workers are going to be out of their jobs unless the company can find some funding to reverse that liquidation plan. So I've been talking to employees over the last few days, and I've been hearing a bit of what they're going through.
That is your Forum Daily West report. I'm Jeanette Roche. Thanks so much for watching.